In this video, I'll consider Russia from 1700 through 1815. We'll start with the Westernizing Peter the Great, then a slew of less significant, in part just due to their short reign of length, emperors, Catherine I, Peter II, Anna, Ivan VI, and then back to longer reigning and far more significant Elizabeth and Catherine II or Catherine the Great. And after the brief reign of Paul I takes us across the new century line, we finally land on the last emperor of the time period under consideration, the Napoleon defeating Alexander I. We start in the year 1700. Russia enters the century not yet rechristened as empire, and instead formally a tsardom. The Tsardom of Muscovy entered and left the year 1700 under the rule of the great Tsar Peter. Peter the Great started the Great Northern War against Sweden that very year, 1700. Early in the war, in 1703, he established a new capital, St. Petersburg, replacing Moscow. The 1721 Treaty of Nystad saw hostilities between the two powers cease, with Sweden relegated to the dustbin of empires for the time being at least, and Russia formally becoming an empire, as Peter the Great celebrated his triumph and boisterous announcement of his arrival on the European power player scene by renaming himself the Emperor of the now Russian Empire. Peter reformed the government, and as established in the 1722 Table of Ranks, he rationalized the nature of acquiring ranks and positions in the military, imperial court, and government with a far more merit-based system, in contrast to the prior merely birth-based system. He reformed taxation, increasing revenue threefold, and partially incorporated the Orthodox Church with the refusal to name a new patriarch from 1700 on, and the establishment of the Holy Synod to replace the Patriarchate. In an effort to both expand Russia's influence as well as stymie possible Ottoman growth at the hands of the weakening Iranian Safavid Empire, Peter launched a war in 1722 against the Safavids and won. His takeover of territory in the Caucasus and northern Iran was formalized in the 1723 Treaty of St. Petersburg. Before Peter dies, he names his second wife, Catherine I, Empress, while he remains ruling until his death in 1725. Catherine I then succeeds Peter, and she contended with the economic toll military expenditures were bringing on by decreasing military expenditures significantly, although generally, when it comes to policies under her administration, she had much less power than Peter, with Alexander Danilovich Menshikov being more in charge than her. She reigned until her death in 1727, upon which Peter the Great's 11-year-old grandson, Peter II, was proclaimed emperor, and he found himself in Menshikov's house on Vasilevsky Island. But that wouldn't last long. Menshikov grew ill, and in September of that year, Peter II exiled him to Siberia and ended the prior engagement plans between himself and Menshikov's daughter. Peter II, a child, didn't care much for the effort required for ruling, so he didn't engage in it much, and this last in the direct male line of Romanovs died aged 14 in 1730. Now came to the position of Empress, the daughter of Ivan V, Ivan V being Peter the Great's older half-brother and early co-ruler, though perhaps in name only. Empress Anna was voted in by the Supreme Privy Council, a council of advisors formerly established under Catherine I. The council had her sign on to numerous conditions limiting her power, but she soon said no, abolished the council, and punished many of those involved in constructing the conditions. Russia would see the territories mentioned earlier to have been conquered by Peter the Great from the Safavids lost with the 1732 Treaty of Resht and the 1735 Treaty of Ganja, and 1735 through 1739 saw a war against the Ottomans, ending with the Treaty of Nis, granting Russia merely the right to an unfortified port at Azov. As Empress Anna's health declined, she had her 2-month-old son made emperor in 1740. But with a coup the following year, the House of Peter the Great recaptured power with Elizabeth of Russia, Peter's second daughter, now empress. Later in Elizabeth's reign, she entered into an alliance with France and Austria against Prussia in the 7 Years' War, but would die in 1762 before that got resolved. She named as her heir a grandson of Peter the Great's through another daughter, Peter III, who briefly took power upon her 1762 death and withdrew Russian forces from the war, signing the 1762 Treaty of St. Petersburg with Prussia. The next ruler was his wife, who overthrew him, and Catherine the Great was now Empress of Russia. Catherine the Great championed Enlightenment ideals, and as was the tension with the other pro-Enlightenment Russian emperors of the time period under discussion, this came with the limitation of autocracy being a prerequisite to them. Catherine patronized the arts and sciences, and she also propped up the nobility with the 1785 Charter to the Gentry, which, among other things, exempted the nobility from taxation and corporal punishment. During her reign, Russia fought 2 wars against the Ottomans, the Russo-Turkish War of 1768 to 1774, ending very well for the Russians with the Treaty of Kucha-Kanarka. Catherine then annexed the Crimea in 1783, which partially brought on Ottoman hostilities, starting the next Russo-Turkish War of 1787 through 1792, which ended fine for the Russians with the Treaty of Jassy. Catherine's reign also saw Russia, along with Austria and Prussia, partition Poland. Catherine the Great died in 1796, and Paul I became emperor. He was assassinated in 1801, and our last emperor of this period, Alexander I, succeeds him. Alexander further expanded the empire, and first fought against Napoleon, but then allied with him before falling apart again in 1810. Napoleon then invaded Russia, which went badly for him, and Russia chased down Napoleon's army, defeating them at the Battle of Leipzig, then taking Paris. Alexander then presided over the Congress of Vienna, meant to figure out and establish the new political boundaries in Europe. And as 1815 passes, Alexander remains.